Welcome to 2020 and beyond, tailoring the web for a new era of business. Thank you for joining us today. We are very excited that you have joined us to discuss the future of the web. Thank you to our partners, Google Chrome Enterprise, for helping bring this event to life. We are excited to have you be a part of the conversation. You can ask our speakers questions via Slido, which you can access either by clicking on the Join the Conversation button located at the bottom right-hand corner of your web browser, or by visiting slido.com via your mobile device and entering the code #tailoringtheweb. You will see there is already an active poll, so tell us, where does your organization expect its employees to be in January 2021? A, fully back in office. B, hybrid with most employees back in office. C, hybrid with most employees remote. D, fully remote. Now, please welcome interviewer Alex Conrad, Senior Editor, Forbes, and Parisa Tabriz, Senior Director of Engineering, Google.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. Really excited to chat today with Parisa. Parisa is the head of product UX and engineering for Chrome. She's had quite a career, including making our second ever 30 under 30 list a few years back. Parisa, it's great to chat with you today. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. It's awesome to be here. I'm no longer under 30, but it's great to have this chat, and thanks to everybody who's taking the time to join for the conversation.
Fantastic. So I'm curious, what is it like having such an important role with Chrome in today's world? We're obviously talking, across the country over Hangouts, and I feel like Chrome in a way has become the mall or the shop front for a lot of our lives now, in this digital experience. So what is that like for you?
So it's a privilege, first and foremost. I actually stepped into my current role in February. Prior to that, I was leading just engineering, so took on more of a general manager role, being responsible for product and UX in February. And then we all know what happened sort of around like end of February, March timeframe with the pandemic. And so it's been an adventure, me just kind of stepping up into a new role and then leading a much larger team through a really dynamic environment. Google went to a fully work from home kind of work setting pretty early on, around March. And so leading a team through that, and also being responsible for Chrome, which I've worked on for a number of years and love, because it's something I use, it's something my friends and family use, it's something that my people I know use it at work in kind of a range of different enterprise settings. So being responsible for that, especially now when people are using Chrome to access information, access services, it's a privilege and a huge responsibility, and one that has, I've been working a lot, but also having a lot of fun. And I feel like this is a year of huge learning for me, and also has accelerated actually a lot of what we wanted to do in Chrome, which has been just exciting for the team. Challenging for sure. Me and team also are struggling with sort of reduced capacity challenges. So it's been a rush, and I don't think that's going to end anytime soon, but I'm having fun.
One of the fun things about my job is I get to talk to people like Stuart Butterfield or Aaron Levy or Jennifer Tejada or yourself, people, in different areas of the cloud world, about what they're building, how their plans change, how they evolve. And from the Chrome standpoint, has the focus evolved kind of in the past few months because of either trends you're seeing with the customers or needs of kind of the different constituents who depend on Chrome?
I don't think the strategy has changed, and so in some ways I don't think the focus has changed. It's accelerated everything, and also we've seen huge need, especially from businesses and enterprise customers, in adapting their businesses to a fully distributed working environment. And so no major change, but we're seeing spikes in trends when we look at that. For example, we see unsurprisingly, a spike in video usage and video communication, on the web. This is how we're holding events, how we're holding meetings, and you see those trends across the web. And so really making sure that kind of the investments we're making in terms of performance and bandwidth savings are, brought maybe up a little bit in roadmap because they're so needed, and we're actually seeing where things can break and how that can be disruptive. We've seen trends in extension usage, so people using Chrome extensions to enhance their productivity at home, or even just usage for entertainment. And so kind of addressing some of the extension work that we've wanted to do has been pulled in just because we see a huge need there. And then for enterprise, again, I actually don't think it's changed our strategy or focus, but we've been able to kind of swarm around some of the enterprise security work we've been doing, some of the work around centralized browser management that we've been doing, just because the need is so much greater now than pre-pandemic. And I think, as a leader, we want to do more. We have actually reduced capacity because, of course, people are being impacted by the pandemic and other things in a lot of ways. And so for me, it's been about very crisp prioritization and pulling some things in and acknowledging that, hey, we may have to kind of go a little bit slower on things that maybe weren't as critical to the world, to businesses pre-pandemic. So not a huge change in focus, but I think prioritization and accelerating certain things that were already planned.
Got it. Has your perspective shifted a lot with the added roles and sort of responsibilities to think about coming from engineering, perhaps, and knowing what their needs are and what the demands are on something like a Chrome from that engineering, standpoint as your true north?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, a lot of what I've been doing over the past couple of months is getting to know our product teams, their ideas, their challenges, kind of their perspectives and constraints, and also our UX and design team, as well as marketing and just different aspects of the business. So it's been a huge amount of learning for me. And I'm lucky to have great engineering leaders who can step up and take care of things while I pivot really hard to understanding different functions. So many people have to come together to create great technology solutions. I come from an engineering background, and so it's sort of what I know best as an IC, but I've always known that that is only one piece of technology. It's only one piece of security. One of the things I love about Chrome is, we think deeply about user experience and how do we make it simple and not clutter your browser with thousands of knobs, because at the end of the day, you can, offer all these different security technologies, but if they're hidden behind a dashboard of knobs, it's not user-friendly and humans are not going to use it. So I've always really appreciated sort of how cross-functional it is, software development and innovation is. Now I get a chance to kind of meet the people and understand nuance and build empathy to how I can help them, and also just how I can help everybody work together. I think that how we do user research and user studies in an environment where we can't, be in the same room, and actually how we do product management when we don't have, that room filled with whiteboards and we can kind of, draw things out, has challenged the team and allowed me to kind of come on that journey of even just understanding how they do their work and how we have to shift it. So.
Awesome. You mentioned security. Not everyone watching may be fully familiar of kind of the twists and turns of your career. I was hoping you could maybe just tell us a little bit about maybe the highlights of your life on the security side. And I think with, trying to popularize HTTPS and kind of, a more safe internet, because I think that perspective would probably, have some interesting parallels with what you're doing right now with Chrome.
Yeah, so my background is very much in security. Have a computer science background and joined Google in a centralized product security team where we had this broad mandate just to kind of help make Google's products more secure. Early in my career, I did this kind of as a joke, but I made business cards because I was going overseas to Japan, and a colleague said, you need business cards. And I made the title on the business card Security Princess as sort of a joke. And it actually stuck for about 10 years in my career. To me, I think technology can be used to empower people and improve humanity, but only if people actually have trust in that technology. I remember when my parents said, don't use the internet, don't buy anything, it's not safe. And now, I mean, they're one-click shoppers on all the sites. And so just for me, recognizing how important it is to build trustworthy technology so people actually use it has been a long part of my career. I moved to Chrome about 6 years ago to lead their security team because I believe that Chrome, from a product engineering leadership perspective, really invested in security. And the browser is your window to the web at the time, and now it's so much more. It's where everyone is doing their work. It's where a lot of us are able to connect, to have this conversation. It's where a lot of people are able to dial in. And so kind of being able to improve people's security and make it default, make it sort of invisible so that people can get to what they need to do or enjoy doing, feels just really like an important mission. And so I joined Chrome to lead security. And, all credit to the team who've actually done the work. I've been sort of the interrupt handler to handle things that fall through the cracks. A couple of years ago, was kind of just thinking about what I wanted to do because I'd done so much work in security. Ended up taking a little bit of a leave from Google to do some government consulting and realized just some of the challenges of an IT environment, and got a chance to see sort of large federal IT, small agencies, different enterprises. And a lot of people, that I interacted with, they're like, yeah, I can use Chrome from home, but it doesn't work for our enterprise for all these different reasons. And so it gave me an empathy to just even understand how security really needs to fit into the business constraints and complexity of different operating environments, and wanting to kind of work on those. And, we want to build a great product with Chrome. We also want to push the platform forward. And so I think you mentioned HTTPS. It's an example of a technology that's been around for decades. And I think all security experts would say, yes, we need HTTPS on the web. It's necessary. It's not sufficient, but it's necessary. And yet it wasn't being adopted. And in part based on that experience of just going outside of like the security bubble, I recognized that like the business case for HTTPS hadn't really been made. And so how do you think about the performance trade-offs, the revenue trade-offs that people were worried about, even just incentivizing this work among all the other different things people were doing? And so HTTPS was, to me, absolutely a security first initiative, but also really important in building my empathy for how important it is to think about security alongside all this other constraints and complexity. And I love that because I think, all important worldwide impactful problems, they have complexity inherent in them. And I love working with different people to kind of wrangle that and push things forward.
Is there a perception side to this where there's sort of like what is really happening from a security standpoint, and then kind of the public discourse, or kind of what a user might perceive as like the most important, security concerns?
Oh.
Sort of a gap between, what you and your team are actually dealing with, and then sort of what we all might be talking about on Twitter.
Yes, I think there is. And, you sort of talk about like, if it bleeds, it leads. And so things tend to be dramatized, and especially sort of titles of articles tend to be dramatized, when in reality, sort of the threats that are really facing people day to day tend to be more mundane. And so I think, when people in my family are worried about an advanced persistent threat or some type of, very sophisticated, well-funded hacker, I'm like, let's just make sure you have two-factor auth set up on your accounts. Like, you don't need to worry about the spies and the sophisticated hackers you're watching on TV or even hearing about as newsfeed. So I do think there's a gap. For a while, I worked on a team of hired hackers. And I think when people hear the term hacker, they think of, the antisocial geek who's trying to kind of bring down large governments. in a maniacal way and or profiting off of people. And I work with hackers who fundamentally want to understand how to break systems, but to make them more secure. And so I do think there's a huge perception gap. I will also acknowledge that I love watching movies and TV shows about cybersecurity, and I don't think I would love them as much if they actually, reflected the mundaneness of the work. And so sometimes I feel bad when I'm talking to the public and they're kind of saying like, what's a day in your life? And expecting that I'm kind of like blocking packets on like an Ethernet cable or forwarding. Unfortunately, like the work it's very interdisciplinary. We work together. It goes slower than reality. So I do think there's a perception gap. I recognize it probably is the case, with most fields. My mom was a nurse, so she kind of looked to ER and was very judgy of how that was represented. And so yes, there's a perception gap.
The layout, simplify pages, and so
that to you unless you would like to. That to you unless you would like to read them yourself. But yeah. And it's actually recording already. So why don't we wait a couple of minutes still, because people filter in slowly. So we could start at like, I don't know. So it's like exactly 12 or for you 9. So we could do like 3 minutes after the hour or something if you'd like, because then that gives people plenty of time. And again, thanks for doing this. I appreciate it.
It's great to be here.
It's I think this is also like one of the first times I've actually like really participated in the SEEP track too. So it's like a little new for me as well.
I think the last time I went to ICSI was maybe 12 years ago. Been a long time.
Well, it's all mostly. I think it's all, aside from the format. I mean, it's similar to how it was. So it seems like Mark is not joining right off the top. So I mean, I'll usually he and I kind of do intros, but if he's not having trouble connecting or something, I'll just address him at the end. Are you guys going back to the office nowadays, by the way? I mean, it's like the conversation now. You're not in the office, though. Are you at home, I guess?
About 30 minutes before this talk, one of my family members tested positive for COVID. So we have had a last-minute game change plan this morning.
Okay. Well, I hope that nobody was exposed. Good luck with that. Seems like it's really going around lately. It's another. I don't know if you noticed, everybody on the internet, like who went to Chi, a lot of people got COVID at Chi, so now everybody for the in-person ICSI is a little concerned. Not everybody, but a lot of people are. So there's like all the
that's
people
how these
worried about things on the internet. Let's see.
All right, if we have one moment, I'm going to refill my coffee mug here.
Yeah, go for it. Alrighty, so maybe if I can like just are you going to share your screen?
No, I'm not going to talk with slides.
Cool. Yes, awesome. I like those. Those are better in my opinion. Okay, So I'll just quickly introduce you, and then you can get going. And this also, just so you know, this time slot, whatever, ends at 1. It just means that other people are going to go somewhere else probably if they have another talk they want to catch. But it's not like somebody is coming up right after you or something. So if people have questions, they can hang around and ask questions if you have the time. But you can also have a hard stop too. That's fine. Okay, so thank you for doing this once again, Adriana. This is Adriana Porterfeld. She works at Google. You're a director of engineering at Google, right? Working on the Chrome team. And I think one of the things that Adriana is pretty well known for is helping HTTPS be like adopted, like broadly. I mean, obviously she's, in the driver's seat of that aspect of Chrome. So via Chrome, but this is sort of a thing that I think probably from Chrome spread everywhere else. So that's a big deal. And so, in general, she tends to focus on, trying to make security and privacy, things like this, like more accessible. In particular, like the sort of like the community that you run with is like the soups community, right? Like the usable privacy and security folks, and you've even like won awards from them. You've got like is it the Test of Time, or it's one of the, what is it? It's the Impact Award, the Soups Impact Award, for Android permissions, right? All kinds of like, the permissions that you're probably familiar with as just a user of computers right now. These are the things that Adriana has kind of focused on throughout her career, and you started life as a started life. I mean, okay, you started off kind of on an academic path, right? You did your PhD at Berkeley, and then you joined Google, and you wanted to introduce more security to people who use Chrome. Basically, it was like your goal, right? And now you've moved up the ladder and have made all kinds of cool security features happen for users, and I think that's like the thing that you're most, and also you're very hilarious on the internet. So if anybody wants to like laugh at accidentally ordering like large numbers of, I don't know, fruit or something on the internet or whatever, like these are things that like your husband have done or whatever. So you're also hilarious. But without further ado, please, I'm gonna close my video, so it's all you, but I'm still here. So.
Hi everyone, it's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I'm Adriana. I first worked at Google as a grad student intern in 2008. And I think the most memorable part of that summer was that I got my first glimpse at a brand new desktop browser that they were building called Chrome. And it launched that summer with a comic book. I then, worked with the Chrome team a bit on some projects while a grad student, and I came back to Google full-time in 2012, fresh PhD in hand, ink still wet, right when Chrome was launching its first mobile versions. And I originally was a research scientist, but at some point switched to engineering. Chrome was still relatively small then when I joined, still had a lot of rough edges. Over these years, I've seen Chrome go from a small upstart browser with kind of a niche market to one of the world's largest consumer software products. And today I'd like to share what that journey's been like and share the different types of product and engineering challenges that we faced at different stages of that journey. All right, so let's roll back time. Let's start with 2008. Hopefully everyone here can remember 2008. The soundtrack of the year was Never Gonna Give You Up, Never Gonna Let You Down. IE was the dominant browser. The founding Chrome engineering team at the time was mostly a mix of experienced browser engineers and academic security researchers. And their dream, their guiding principle as they built this new browser was to build a shiny new browser for themselves, based on what they wanted out of a browser. What we call the 4 S's: security, speed, simplicity, and stability. Now, maybe I'm biased because I started my career, or perhaps, the way Heather tells my story, like my life as a baby as a security researcher. But despite that bias, I think the most interesting engineering challenge that they faced in this era were how to build a more secure browser architecture. Existing browsers, i.e. Firefox at the time, had two big problems. The first was that websites were running in the same processes as each other. And also sort of high privilege parts of the browser and high risk parts of the browser were also running in shared processes. And actually, I'm going to tell you this part of the story by quoting a paper, Isolating Web Programs in Modern Browser and Architectures by Charlie Rice and Steve Gribble from UW from 2009. Quote, today's publishers are deploying web pages that act more like programs than simple documents. And these programs are growing in complexity and demand for resources. Remember, this is 2008, 2009. Most websites at this point are not web apps. They're kind of like, for the most part, sort of static pages you read. Maybe, I have a few sections you can click on. They're not, it was new at the time that web pages were becoming kind of rich and full featured. Current web browser architectures, on the other hand, are still designed primarily for rendering basic pages, in that they do not provide sufficient isolation between concurrently executing programs. As a result, competing programs within the browser encounter many types of interference that affect their fault tolerance, memory management, and performance. Surprisingly, web browsers do not yet have a program abstraction that can be easily isolated. Neither pages nor origins have appropriate isolation boundaries because some groups of pages, even those from different origins, can interact with each other within the browser. Now, from the very beginning, an architectural goal of building Chrome was to try to isolate different parts of the browser from itself, so that the parts of the browser closest to websites were the least privileged and only interacted by well-defined IPC channels with more privileged parts of the browser. And also, as that paper was alluding to, different web principles were isolated from each other. And over the years, over the last, 12 years since that paper was written, the browser has increased the sophistication and hardness of the isolation primitives until the point today where we have a truly multi-process desktop browser and with different websites that don't have to share processes. Now, the reason why I was quoting from a paper here, or instead of just telling it totally my own words, was because I wanted to drive home the point that the idea of a multi-process browser came out of academic research. Charlie Rice and Adam Barth were among the most prolific and well-known web security researchers at the time as students and postdocs. And then they joined the early Chrome team right at the beginning of Chrome's creation and brought their ideas with them. And, I think Charlie in particular had this audacious research vision that, took maybe 10 years of engineering to fully complete. All right, so I promised that there are two problems. The first one that I was just talking about is separation of principles. The second one was that extensions and add-ons as they existed at the time in other browsers were a big mess. I.e. add-ons were often malicious and they could take over your whole computer pretty readily. Firefox extensions were better, but still a constant source of pain. So
they can have the greatest success. I think we're
going to do that.
So hello and welcome to the official Xbox podcast. I'm your host, Tina Amini, and we have a very special episode today, as you can probably tell by the fact that I'm joined by Phil, Sarah, and Matt. Welcome. And we're going to talk about some updates at Xbox. We want to talk about game exclusivity. We want to talk about Activision Blizzard now that they're part of our portfolio, how that might be an impact on Game Pass. And we want to talk about hardware too and how all of this fits into the strategy at Xbox. So where should we start, Phil?
Well, when we originally had planned for the show, starting back in December, I think we probably would have started with Activision Blizzard, maybe talked a little bit about the exclusivity with some of the news coming up, and then hardware. But we've had some unforeseen news that has come out. So let's just go and tackle the exclusivity question, because I know it's on the minds of a lot of people. We hear from the community, and that's an important input for us. So we made the decision that we're going to take 4 games to the other consoles, just 4 games, not a change to our kind of fundamental exclusive strategy. We're making these decisions for some specific reasons. We make every decision really with the long-term health of Xbox in mind. And long-term health of Xbox means a growing platform, our games performing, building the best platform for creators, reaching as many players as we can. We're always looking to learn as a leadership team and to grow. And we think this is an interesting point in time for us to use what some of the other platforms have right now to help grow our franchises. So we're going to do that.
So these 4 titles, what are they? Can you say?
I'm not going to name those games. The teams that are building those games have announced plans that are not too far away. As we know, game teams put a lot of energy into their announcements with the partners. So I don't want to take anything away from those teams. So I won't be talking about the titles specifically, but I think when they come out, it'll make sense.
Can we say if either of those titles are Starfield or Indiana Jones?
They are not Starfield or Indiana Jones.
Well, what was the criteria in how the team was thinking about selecting those 4 titles?
Let me start a little bit outside of that, and then I'll get to the 4 specific games that we're talking about right now. Because the fundamental decision driver for any decision that we make, anything we're going to talk about today, is the long-term health of Xbox. That we're running a growing platform that is reaching more players, that our games are having as much success as possible. And I do have a fundamental belief that over the next 5 or 10 years, exclusive games that are exclusive to one piece of hardware, are going to be a smaller and smaller part of the game industry. And that's not some great insight, because if you look at the last 10 years and what the biggest games are today, it's a natural place. Whether it's one console and PC, multiple consoles, mobile console and PC, you see big games landing on multiple platforms. And we want to be a great platform for creators that are trying to realize that potential. But now back to the specifics of the question on these four specific titles. We looked at games that are over a year old, so they've been on Xbox and PC for a while. A couple of the games are community-driven games, new games, that kind of first iterations of a franchise that have reached their full potential, I'd say, on Xbox and PC. There's always growth. Franchises that we obviously want to continue to invest in. Part of having the ability to continue to invest is that the businesses behind those franchises continue. We think it's important that these service-based games that have communities behind them, that they can have confidence that they're going to exist in the future. So 2 of them, kind of community-driven games that will end up on other platforms and give us the ability to continue to invest in them. We think that's great for the business and great for the communities, more players to play with. I'd say 2 of the other games are smaller games that were never really meant to be built as kind of platform exclusives and all the fanfare that goes around that. But games that our teams really wanted to go build, that we love supporting creative endeavors across our studios, regardless of size. And as they've realized their full potential on Xbox and PC, we see an opportunity to utilize the other platforms as a place to just drive more business value out of those games, allowing us to invest in maybe future iterations of those, so sequels to those, or just other games like that in our portfolio. And when we don't damage Xbox and we can grow our business using what other platforms have and to help us with that, we're going to do that. And that's really the story behind these 4 games. And last thing I'll say, looking forward, I think there is an interesting story for us of introducing Xbox franchises to players on other platforms to get them more interested in Xbox. We think there's a good brand value for Xbox there. So 4 games, no promise beyond that. So if you're on those other platforms and you see these 4 games coming, please don't take it as some signal that everything's coming. It's not. And we're going to learn.
So when you are thinking about the future and this concept of live service games, games that can benefit from bigger audiences, new audiences, how does that apply to future titles and how you're applying that criteria there?
Yeah, there's really no fundamental change to how we think about exclusivity. We just came out of Developer Direct, which was an awesome show, where we showed great games that are coming to Xbox and PC and cloud, which really makes them accessible to hundreds of millions of people. So it's this kind of, we're really focused on a couple platforms and what's going to show up there. But our key of play the games you want with the people you want, anywhere you want, when everybody plays, we all win. These have been part of our strategy for years and will continue to be. Our focus is on how do we continue to grow the games industry by reaching more players in more places, and how do we grow Xbox as part of that. Xbox as a hardware platform, Xbox as a publisher of great games, and Xbox as a platform for the world's best creators.
And then knowing that, how do we think about our first-party games and Game Pass?
Yeah, well, to build on
using what other platforms have and to help us with that, we're going to do that. And that's really the story behind these 4 games. And last thing I'll say, looking forward, I think there is an interesting story for us of introducing Xbox franchises to players on other platforms to get them more interested in Xbox. We think there's a good brand value for Xbox there. So 4 games, no promise beyond that. So if you're on those other platforms and you see these 4 games coming, please don't take it as some signal that everything's coming. It's not. And we're going to learn.
So when you are thinking about the future and this concept of live service games, games that can benefit from bigger audiences, new audiences, how does that apply to future titles and how you're applying that criteria there?
Yeah, there's really no fundamental change to how we think about exclusivity. We just came out of Developer Direct, which was an awesome show, where we showed great games that are coming to Xbox and PC and cloud, which really makes them accessible to hundreds of millions of people. So it's this kind of, we're really focused on a couple platforms and what's going to show up there. But our key of play the games you want with the people you want, anywhere you want, when everybody plays, we all win. These have been part of our strategy for years and will continue to be. Our focus is on how do we continue to grow the games industry by reaching more players in more places, and how do we grow Xbox as part of that. Xbox is a hardware platform, Xbox is a publisher of great games, and Xbox as a platform for the world's best creators.
And then knowing that, how do we think about our first-party games and Game Pass?
Yeah, well, to build on what Phil just said, one thing I would add, as you were talking about growth, is just that we've sort of seen this inversion over the last 5 years where it used to be that the platform was the biggest thing.
That's right.
And the games would sort of tuck in within the platform. Today, big games like a Roblox or a Fortnite could actually be bigger than any one platform. And that really has changed the way that we think about things. So in the midst of all that, I think we at First Party can come back to sort of some core principles. First, that all of our games will be on the Xbox platform. Second, all of our games will go into Game Pass on day one. And third, we know that Game Pass will only be available on Xbox. So there's sort of starting points for us. As Phil mentioned, there are games today that you can play that only can be found on Xbox. And at the same time, we want to bring more of our games to more players. So we're going to continue to look at that. Kind of moving aside, though, from some of those and thinking more about what does it really mean for the player, to me, the 2 key things are cross-play and cross-save. Those things allow us to deliver on the promise of Xbox, which is play with your friends where they are, play on the devices you want, play the games you want. So that is really only possible at a practical level when you know that your saves and your player are going to be able to move across all those parts. So not all of our games today are necessarily built to take advantage of that. There still will be some games that don't. As we bring more teams into the Xbox family, there's some catch up to do as we get there. But that cross-play, cross-save is like so fundamental to what we're doing, and I think is something that we as First Party get such a good benefit from being so close to the platform.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things, like you said, all of our games are always in Game Pass. And so I'm excited to announce, with the coming together that we had with Activision Blizzard King, that Activision and Blizzard games are coming to Game Pass, starting with Diablo 4 on March 28th, which I'm super, super excited to share today. And it's all part of our commitment to make Xbox, the Xbox experience and the games that we build as widely available as possible. So now the 34 million Game Pass members can all enjoy the fantastic experience of Diablo 4.
Amazing. Can we come back to the point, Phil, you mentioned at the top, this isn't really a change in strategy for us. Can you recap for me how it isn't?
Yeah, and I thought both Matt and Sarah did a really nice job of talking about what we're doing on Xbox, where we're going. If you take a platform feature like Xbox Play Anywhere, which has been a promise that we've made on our first-party games, that you can buy our game once, you're going to get to play across Xbox and Windows. I think we're the only platform that does this. That makes it possible for you not only to play with your friends wherever they are, but to know that you actually have multiple entitlements to the games. I think that's a technology I would love to see applied to more platforms. But it is this view that people are going to play Xbox in multiple places. Whether it's play the games you want with the people you want, anywhere you want, whether it's content, community, and cloud, whether it's when everybody plays, we all win. Like, we've had different taglines, different strategy, kind of words that we've used, but always with this view that Xbox is a platform for creators who want to reach the most players. Our investments in xCloud, our investments in franchises like Minecraft and now Call of Duty and other large franchises so that we learn how to build those. This has been a strategy that we've been on for, I'd say, a decade. It's not about one device. It's not about games in service of a device, but rather the devices that people want to play on should be in service of making the games as big and popular as they possibly could be. Because really a healthy creator community on Xbox, a healthy creator community in gaming all up, is the thing that all of us as game players should be voting for, because that's the thing that will lead to the best long-term success and growth in this industry.
And my understanding, just from listening and learning from you three over the past few weeks, just understanding what's happening with Xbox, is that we see trends with player behavior where people are playing on multiple devices. That is the reality. And we have put some games out on multiple platforms before. So my understanding is that that's been good for players. How does that come back to the business with all of that in mind?
Yeah, as you said, we have shipped games on other platforms. In fact, realistically, if you look with the addition of Activision and Blizzard and ZeniMax, we're one of the largest game publishers on PlayStation. We're one of the largest publishers on the Nintendo Switch, especially when you put Minecraft into the equation as well. And now we're one of the largest publishers on mobile platforms as well. And that's not something that we want to back away from. We want to continue to be building great games that millions and millions of people can love, and that they can play those games where they want to go play. But we do understand the business success that Xbox has to have. Us as leaders in this business, the system today, the system that all companies that we play video games from, is a world of you got to be growing your business. Growth in our Xbox business is critical to the long-term health of Xbox. Many people know I've been on Xbox for over 20 years. And I want to make sure Xbox is in the best position for the next 20 years. That means healthy player community, healthy creator community, and healthy business. So when we look at opportunities to allow more people to play, more people engage, more people to buy, more people to subscribe, it's all about putting Xbox in the best position. And our hardware is a critical component of that. The absolute best experience somebody has on Xbox is hardware that your team builds and that people play on. But that's not going to be everybody. We fully accepted that we're going to have Xbox players across all kinds of devices.
So I think a lot of people think about 2023 as this incredible year for gaming. And in a lot of ways it was. There were some really amazing releases that I think we all enjoyed. But what were the signals behind the scenes that maybe indicated how we wanted to look at the future of Xbox and how we kind of keep up with the industry?
Yeah, such a good question. And I think it's, as people who care about the industry, which I assume is people who are watching this, it was an amazing year. Some great launches, some of the games that I think will stand the test of time and people will be talking about a decade from now. But it's an industry that didn't really grow. And what happens when an industry doesn't grow? You end up with some job eliminations, which we had. We had even our own hard decisions to make about building a sustainable business for ourselves, but in no way were we alone in that. When you think about a healthy industry, I want players who believe that they will find the best games on the platforms that they love. I want people who invest their careers in working here to feel like this is a place that they can be successful. And that really is down to being part of an industry that is growing. If you listen to Lisa Su, the AMD CEO, she'll say that AMD-powered consoles are likely to decline in 2024. I think there's an amazing set of games coming in 2024, but if we don't get to growing as an industry, the industry will struggle. And today there's really two choices on how do you grow the industry. Do you say I have a fixed number of players, the players that we have today, and do I find new ways to monetize those players to get more money from the players that I have? Or do you think about how do I expand the business I have by finding new players and adding those to the base of players that already play? Our focus on Xbox for the last decade has really been on that latter point of how do we make sure Xbox is growing for our players, growing for our creators, so those people are finding success on our platform, which will grow the Xbox business and put Xbox in a position to be very strong for years and decades to come.
Matt, earlier you were talking about these growing gaming communities, how they're incredibly large and comparable on such a different level when we think about console audiences. Like you mentioned Roblox, you mentioned Fortnite. So how are we're obviously thinking about our responsibility, our hardware responsibility is supporting the growth of gaming communities. How has that actually shown up for the players? Are there other games we can speak to from our portfolio?
Well, as Phil mentioned, two of the biggest ones for us, Call of Duty and Minecraft, they are driven just from the bottom up by the communities of people that play those games, which is so great. I think Think about it, for the player community, it comes down to where are the friends, where are the people you play with, and then equally important is where have you built up your library of games, right? Where have you invested? Where's that library? I think those two things probably are some of the biggest influences on where people choose to play and what devices they choose to play.
Yeah.
When we think about, on the other side, the developer side, just any game developer wants their game to find the biggest audience possible. That's just the nature of building a game. You want people to enjoy and participate in what you've made. And I think we're in a unique position to deliver on that just because we are the platform. We build hardware, we've got a first-party games group, and then we've got a system that ties that together, that brings together your friends, your progression, your achievements, all of that. And I think that's really what has contributed to the momentum behind some of these communities.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you look at, just step back and you look at the history of the industry, we've moved from a place where it used to be that someone built and launched a game to accelerate hardware to actually the things we do with our hardware and with our platform are all in service of making those games bigger. And we think about that across all of the investments we make, the consoles we build, the investments we do with things like cross-play, cross-progression, the things that we're doing with cloud. How do we actually give more options to game creators so they can have the greatest success? I think one of the fun recent examples about this is actually Power World. You know, Power World was able to launch, they were a game preview, they launched in Game Pass, they also simultaneously launched in Steam. And through the combination of those things, you know, Pocket Pair was able to have this outsized success, and it was the largest third-party Game Pass launch ever. And that's all because we give creators options on how they can launch their games. We've got subscription, we've got retail, we've got free-to-play, we've got game preview. We have the consoles, we have our experience on PC, and they can access all of those things. And when we step back and we just look at the performance of our platform all up, we know it's working. We're at the highest level of users on console, the highest level of users on PC, the highest level of users on cloud ever. We have double-digit growth rate on PC and cloud, places where we're enabling creators to actually reach new players beyond the console ecosystem. And that's why we're leaning into it and doing more, because we see all those signals.
So we're talking about the role that hardware plays for creators, for the games and those communities. What about the role that hardware plays for us as a business, for Xbox?
When we look at our hardware, it really is, and Phil said this earlier, it's where you get like the most flagship seminal experience of Xbox. And it also represents a developer target. Our developers can build the specs of our hardware, and we invest to make sure they know when they do that the games are going to run great on our hardware, but they're also going to be able to be accessed across any screen because of all the other investments we make. So we're giving them an easy way to access as many players as possible. And we actually have more creators right now building for Xbox than ever before by nature, thousands of them by nature of those investments. And we got more to come. There's some exciting stuff coming out in hardware that we're going to share this holiday. And we're also invested in the next generation roadmap. And what we're really focused on there is delivering the largest technical leap you will have ever seen in a hardware generation, which makes it better for players and better for creators and the visions that they're building.
And then when we're talking about hardware too, there's these other considerations that are really important to our community, probably to each one of ourselves as well. When you talk about library, because I want to dig in on that a little bit more. You know, as we talk about cloud in the wider entertainment industry, there's conversations about streaming. How is that impacting how I own my content that I've invested in? So what can we say about our stance around game preservation?
Yeah, you know, one of the highlights for me of being in this position was getting to stand on stage when we announced the back compat coming to Xbox One. Like, it was fantastic. People were reading the teleprompter before I could read it. I'm a slow reader, and just feeling the energy in the auditorium as we were saying that and online. You know, one of the cues I think us as being part of Microsoft take is looking at Windows and how Windows over decades has maintained software compatibility with things that are built on it. Like, I can still go back and play some of the games that I love playing on Windows from decades ago, and it will still run. And we try to bring that same view to consoles. It's harder in console because the line between what the hardware is and what the game is in consoles is traditionally, it's tighter, which makes compatibility, you end up doing these generational compatibilities that we've built. But I will say compatibility the ability to not only play the games, but my saves are still there with our cloud save systems to try to keep the services up as long as we can so that people can play is a tenet of what we are as Xbox. It's at our foundation. And when we look at future hardware generations and what we're gonna support, making sure that we respect, which is the word I use, respect the investments that people have made in Xbox going forward is fundamental. And the fact that you get entitlements when you buy a game from us on both Windows and Xbox also means you have the ability to play that game across a multitude of devices, which I think furthers the compatibility of the games that you own.
Can we go back to what Xbox stands for today? I think we've pretty much covered all of the elements, but if you could break it down for me.
You know, when you play on Xbox, what we're saying is you're playing on a platform where you know the biggest games in the world are always going to be. You're playing on a platform where you get to access Game Pass. And all of the games from our incredible range of studios will always launch in Game Pass day one. And you're playing on a platform that's dedicated to you, like player-first features, cross-play, cross-save, cross-progression, backwards compatibility, being able to play your games in your library anywhere you want because of the investments that we make in cloud gaming. And so you're playing somewhere where you're investing and you know you get to take the games forward with you and across all of the screens where you are. And I think most importantly, Xbox is a place where you know when you're investing in Xbox, you're investing somewhere that is dedicated to making games more successful and creators more successful so that they can invest more to bring even better experiences to you all of the time.
Yeah, just that investment in the studios is so, and we feel that as part of first party with the platform proximity. You know, it's kind of amazing now to look out across all the studios we've got and just be reminded that we're now one of the biggest development organizations in the industry. What does that mean for players? It means that the biggest games are going to continue to come to Xbox. And this 2024, the year coming up, we've got more than 10 major releases coming up. Great stuff. Hellblade 2, we've got Diablo expansion, we've got Avowed, Ara, the Indiana Jones game, and there's more in development, which I think we're going to be able to share more about at our June showcase coming up pretty soon.
Well, I guess I should get ready to work on that show. Well, thank you all for showing up on the podcast today, and we'll see the rest of you this June.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tina.
Thank you.
Hello everyone and welcome to Xbox On. My name is Charlie and today I'm going to be speaking to an incredible guest. Sarah Bond is sat with me today, but before we start, make sure if you want anything to do with Xbox, that Xbox On is your place. We do previews, we do news, everything. So make sure you subscribe right now. Do it right now. I know you won't. Okay, you've done it. Perfect. Anyway, Sarah, how are you? How are you doing?
I'm great. It's so good to see you in person.
In person as well. Fancy that.
I know. I had thought we'd met in person before because you see someone on a screen and you think it's real. So
the yellow
so
kind of
awesome.
sticks with you, huh? So Sarah, obviously welcome back to the UK. It's always lovely to have you here, and I hear you've got a little bit of a busy week coming up. So what are you up to?
Well, first of all, I love the UK. Okay, I just want to be, I love spending time here. And I used to come quite often pre-pandemic because I really love the opportunity to connect with developers and publishers directly. And so coming back on a regular basis, now that we're able to travel more freely, is something that I'm excited to do. And you know, the UK is just such an important part of the gaming industry.
Oh yeah.
There are so many iconic, creative stories that come from UK developers. And we, Microsoft, actually have 4 game studios located here in the UK. Yeah. And we have actually over 1,000 employees here in the UK. 600 of them are developers.
Wow.
So the opportunity to connect both with teams outside of Microsoft that work with us, but also the teams that are part of our own Xbox first-party teams is pretty exciting.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's also London Games Week, so I'm going to get to stop by there. And then I'm also going to get to cap it off by going to the BAFTAs, where we actually have 4 Xbox first-party games are nominated.
Congratulations.
Yeah. As Does Falls, Pentiment, Forza Horizon 5, and Elder Scrolls Online.
I mean, I don't want to be biased. I do think all of them should win.
Okay.
Big fan of them all, but
I am
that
too.
sounds like it's going to be fantastic. That's quite a week you've got there.
Yeah, and I get to present an award at the BAFTAs. I'm going to present the Best British Game Award.
Ooh,
Yeah.
that's, I mean, it's best award of them all, really.
Yes, exactly.
Coming from a Brit. Love it. So I want to ask, I ask everyone who always comes around here, but what games have you been playing recently?
Oh man, well I got really into Hi-Fi Rush.
I think we all did, huh?
The whole family did.
Yeah.
My kids couldn't stop playing, I couldn't stop playing, and I do love it. But I was also at GDC last week, so I got to see a whole bunch of stuff that teams are working on that isn't fully out yet. I can't share all of it, but I did get to play some of Planet of Lana, and it was just so beautiful and precious.
I remember seeing that at one of our showcases recently and it looking very nice.
Yes, I'm very excited for it.
Okay, I'm also now very envious. So I want to also say, as you already mentioned kind of at the top, we've already mentioned it, but we did speak a couple years ago, if you can believe it now, in the year long gone in memory, 2021, when you joined me on the Women of Xbox UK podcast. Watch it if you haven't, by the way. She makes me cry, it's dreadful, but it's a wonderful chat. And so I'm curious to know, how has your role changed since then? And what new bits and pieces have you been working on?
Gosh, it's been 2 years.
2 years.
You know, and I think that was also one of my first tweets. And now I tweet.
It was, you set it up, I remember.
I did, I was quite excited. Well, my team is essentially dedicated to everything that goes into creators and partners bringing their games to Xbox and working with Xbox. So that's our developer tools, that's our publishing tool sets, that's all of our commercial relationships. And so we get to do really cool things like curate all the games in Game Pass, the idea.That Xbox programs on my team, but also all our strategic partnerships as well.
So just a little bit of work.
Just a tiny support role.
Just a tiny bit. And I know that you hugely champion diversity as well, not only in the work at Microsoft, but the games that you work with as well, right?
Yeah, you know, I'm particularly cognizant. I mean, I've lived my life as an African American woman. And I think all the time about what I can do to improve the experience for others, not just African Americans, but for everybody, right? Like you want to leave the world better than you started it,
for sure.
right? And in my time in this industry, one thing that struck me is that, you know, gaming is truly the most immersive media form that there is. You know, in a game, you can connect with someone who you've never met, you don't know what they look like, you can have a shared achievement with them. You can also play a game that exposes you to a perspective or an experience that you would have never otherwise had.
Absolutely.
But when you look at the predominance of who gets to create games today, it isn't actually representative of everyone on the planet, right? And when you combine that with knowing that our children, you know, people under 25 would way rather play a video game than any other form of media, I looked at that and I said, wow, we have both sort of, this is an imperative for us here, but also this huge opportunity. And that if we can really open up and make it possible for anybody to tell their story, to share their perspective through a game, that has such a huge impact on our ability as humans to just connect and to focus on what connects us more and what we have in common more than on what divides us.
Absolutely, and I think, you know, we spoke previously on that aforementioned podcast. You really should watch it, by the way. We both have kids, I believe now under 11. I think our daughters are the same age.
11.
11 next month for me. And I know that when I look back at that age, I wasn't playing games as diverse as what she's playing now and backgrounds and the opportunities she's got. So knowing that her development as a gamer as well as a human being will be affected by the positive effects of gaming and what we've got on offer is just amazing, and I love to see it.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah, it's so good. So you did mention already GDC, and I wanted to circle back around on that because I've never been myself, and I just wanted to know what it was like. Did you enjoy it? Did you have a good time?
Well, it was awesome, and you better come next year.
I'll see what I can do. I might have to send a couple emails to see if I can get there. Or I
Okay.
can just tag along in your suitcase.
Okay, well, I'm going to make sure of it next year.
Yeah.
It was fantastic. It's been a couple years since we've had GDC, really that's fully in person. They had 24,000 people. It really felt like the industry was back and together and full force. It was just such a huge jolt of energy. Honestly, I'm still sort of coming down from how excited I was. And we had two really cool pieces of news that we shared. The first is, if you can believe it, it's been 10 years of the idea.Xbox program.
It's unbelievable.
It was started in 2013, the same year as the launch of the Xbox One. And so we just announced the impact of that program over the last 10 years. We've actually paid out $4 billion to developers.
That's incredible.
5,000 creators in the program now. 600 of them have actually had a game in Game Pass, which is pretty cool.
What a cool figure. I love that.
And it keeps growing. So we actually have added 700 more creators in the last year. So it's a program that's continuing to gain momentum. Even after 10 years, it's growing faster than ever. So we shared that, which was exciting to get to share and just share our commitment to independent developers with the world. But the second thing, which was just an amazingly emotional and beautiful moment, we announced our Developer Acceleration Program.
Yes, I remember seeing that, yeah.
And that is a program that is dedicated to supporting developers that come from communities that aren't today fully represented in gaming, or are building stories that really respectfully represent characters, narratives, and stories that come from communities that aren't fully represented.
So I think that's particularly exciting because I know loads of UK fans and UK creators as well get to have hands-on a wider, diverse array of games, as well as getting all those stories out of their head and putting it on Xbox, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We actually have 700 developers in the UK who are currently developing for Xbox.
Incredible.
I'm getting to connect with some of them tomorrow, as I was telling you earlier. And it's also one of the things that I think is really special about Game Pass is Game Pass is great for players. They can find a game they otherwise wouldn't, but it's also great for creators because they can get discovered in ways they otherwise couldn't, because people are more willing to try a game that's new or novel if it's part of Game Pass and if they had to make a retail purchase from it. And one of the things that creators consistently tell me is that is one thing they deeply appreciate about the program. If they're thinking about trying a new mechanic or a storyline that's a bit untraditional or something innovative and edgy, with Game Pass, they feel more comfortable being able to do that because they know they're going to be able to find that audience. And so we just see so much opportunity for growth in the gaming industry, but also in particular from creators in the UK. So that's one of the reasons why I'm here, as I said earlier.
We're such an excitable country. We just want to play games and make things.
And you have beans on toast.
And we have beans on toast, absolutely. I mean, I don't want to horrify anyone, but I'm not a fan of beans on toast. I'm more of a spaghetti hoops on toast kind of gal, if that's all right.
Okay, I'll still talk to you. The only thing is that I actually...
But I'm not getting a Christmas card anymore.
No, I did. I was educated in the UK. Not everybody knows this about me.
Yeah, you were here for like 10 years, right?
Yeah, I lived here for 10 years. And I spent about 5 of them only eating beans on toast.
Exclusively. I love it. Just fueled on the stuff.
Pretty much, yes.
So talking about general health, what do you feel the future of the industry is like at the moment? Are we looking good for the rest of the year? Are we going to have a healthy one?
I think we absolutely will. I'm really excited for the rest of the year. There's some fantastic games coming out. One of them I'm most excited about is Redfall.
Yes.
I'm really excited about that.
And it's nearly here as well.
And Diablo 4, which just looks...
Did you have a go in the beta, Jack?
I have played it, yes. I gave a try of Necromancer, which was pretty amazing.
Yeah, Necromancer Sorcerer is normally my type. I unfortunately didn't get the Puppy Wolf backpack. You had to get to level 20 and I didn't get there.
All right, well, next time maybe.
Yeah, next time
so really, really great games coming out. Just fantastic innovation coming out across the industry. But I'm also excited. I've been spending a lot of time with Phil and the team on the Activision Blizzard King deal. I'm excited to see us close that deal. It's just going to give so much opportunity for us to take everything that we do as Xbox, really putting the player at the center, really giving developers and creators opportunity, and to continue to scale that and grow that once they join our team. So that's another big thing. And then the last thing that people have been talking a lot about, and I think is going to be enormously powerful, is just looking at how AI is going to be able to influence our industry. We were talking earlier about how I see it as so important that everybody get the opportunity to express themselves through a game. But gaming, unlike music and video, isn't as accessible to citizen creators. You see some examples of it, but it's not universal. And that's because it's hard to make a game. Gaming is really complex. It's high latency, it's interactive, it's multivariate, it's very performant. And so AI, I feel like, can really democratize game development, give opportunities for more people to create. And I'm really excited for what that will do. And when you combine it too with powerful tools of discovery it can drive, it just kind of turbocharge all of that. I see a world where we're going to see more creation in games and make it easier for people to match people with the games that they love.
Amazing. Also, I mean, I recently spoke to Phil as well, and he kind of said the same about ABK and the way everything's going. He even touched on AI as well, so I can just feel this like general swell of excitement coming for you guys around it, and it's wonderful to watch unfold. And I know we've got some other big things happening on the rest of the year. You mentioned Redfall, we've got Starfield as well. We know we're going to be getting a developer direct on that. So, I mean, I don't know how much you're involved with those titles, but it must be pretty exciting to see them come into fruition, right?
It is. And then, of course, we're going to have our normal summer showcase as well. So yeah, lots of cool stuff coming.
I'll get the popcorn in. Wonderful. Well, I think that's everything we've got time for, really, Sarah. I know you're very, very busy this week. So I'm going to remind everyone at home, if you still haven't yet, make sure you are subscribing to Xbox On, because we get to have fun chats with Sarah and we give you all the preview, news and gameplay you need on everything covering Xbox. So we'll see you in the next one. And Sarah, thanks again for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, folks.
The layout, simplify pages.
That to you, unless you would like to read them yourself, but yeah. And it's actually recording already. So why don't we wait a couple of minutes still, because people filter in slowly. So I mean, we could start at like, I don't know. So it's like exactly 12, or for you 9. So I mean, we could do like 3 minutes after the hour or something if you'd like, because then that gives people plenty of time. And again, thanks for doing this. I appreciate it.
It's great to be here.
It's I think this is also like one of the first times I've actually like really participated in the Seek track too. So it's like a little new for me as well.
I think the last time I went to ICSI was maybe 12 years ago. Been a long time.
Well, it's all mostly. I think it's all, aside from the format. I mean, it's similar to how it was. So it seems like Mark is not joining right off the top. So I mean, I'll usually he and I kind of do intros, but if he's not having trouble connecting or something, I'll just address him at the end. Are you guys going back to the office nowadays, by the way? I mean, it's like the conversation now. You're not in the office, though. Are you at home, I guess?
About 30 minutes before this talk, one of my family members tested positive for COVID. So we have had a last minute game change plan this morning.
Okay. Well, I hope that nobody was exposed. Good luck with that. Seems like it's really going around lately. It's another. I don't know if you noticed, everybody on the internet, like who went to Chi, a lot of people got COVID at Chi, so now everybody for the in-person ICSI is a little concerned. Not everybody, but a lot of people are. So there's like all the
that's
people
how these
worried about things on the internet. Let's see.
All right, if we have one moment, I'm going to refill my coffee mug here.
Oh, go for it. Alrighty, so maybe if I can like just are you gonna share your screen?
No, I'm not going to talk with slides.
Cool. Yes, awesome. I like those. Those are better in my opinion. Okay, so I'll just quickly introduce you and then you can get going. And this also, just so you know, this time slot, whatever, ends at 1. It just means that other people are going to go somewhere else probably if they have another talk they want to catch. But it's not like somebody is coming up right after you or something. So if people have questions, they can hang around and ask questions if you have the time. You can also have a hard stop too. That's fine. Okay, so thank you for doing this once again, Adriana. This is Adriana Porterfeld. She works at Google. You're a director of engineering at Google, right? Working on the Chrome team. And I think one of the things that Adriana is pretty well known for is helping HTTPS be like adopted, like broadly. I mean, obviously she's, in the driver's seat of that aspect of Chrome. So via Chrome, but this is sort of a thing that I think probably from Chrome spread everywhere else. So that's a big deal. And so, in general, she tends to focus on, trying to make security and privacy, things like this, like more accessible. In particular, like the sort of like the community that you run with is like the SOUPS community, right? Like the usable privacy and security folks, and you've even like won awards from them. You've got like is it the Test of Time or it's one of the, what is it? It's the Impact Award, the SOUPS Impact Award for Android permissions, right? All kinds of like, the permissions that you're probably familiar with as just a user of computers right now. These are the things that Adriana has kind of focused on throughout her career. And you started life as a started life. I mean, okay. You started off kind of on an academic path, right? You did your PhD at Berkeley, and then you joined Google, and you wanted to introduce more security to people who use Chrome. Basically, was like your goal, right? And now you've moved up the ladder and have made all kinds of cool security features happen for users. And I think that's like the thing that you're most, and also you're very hilarious on the internet. So if anybody wants to like laugh at accidentally ordering like large numbers of, I don't know, fruit or something on the internet or whatever, like these are things that like your husband have done or whatever. So you're also hilarious. But without further ado, please, I'm gonna close my video so it's all you, but I'm still here. So.
Hi everyone, it's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I'm Adriana. I first worked at Google as a grad student intern in 2008. And I think the most memorable part of that summer was that I got my first glimpse at a brand new desktop browser that they were building called Chrome. And it launched that summer with a comic book. I then, worked with the Chrome team a bit on some projects while a grad student, and I came back to Google full-time in 2012, fresh PhD in hand, ink still wet, right when Chrome was launching its first mobile versions. And I originally was a research scientist, but at some point switched to engineering. Chrome was still relatively small then when I joined, still had a lot of rough edges. Over these years, I've seen Chrome go from a small upstart browser with kind of a niche market to one of the world's largest consumer software products. And today I'd like to share what that journey's been like and share the different types of product and engineering challenges that we faced at different stages of that journey. All right, so let's roll back time. Let's start with 2008. Hopefully everyone here can remember 2008. The soundtrack of the year was Never Gonna Give You Up, Never Gonna Let You Down. IE was the dominant browser. The founding Chrome engineering team at the time was mostly a mix of experienced browser engineers and academic security researchers. And their dream, their guiding principle as they built this new browser was to build a shiny new browser for themselves, based on what they wanted out of a browser. What we call the 4 S's: security, speed, simplicity, and stability. Now, maybe I'm biased because I started my career, or perhaps, the way Heather tells my story, like my life as a baby as a security researcher. But despite that bias, I think the most interesting engineering challenge that they faced in this era were how to build a more secure browser architecture. Existing browsers, IE and Firefox at the time, had 2 big problems. The first was that websites were running in the same processes as each other. And also sort of high privileged parts of the browser and high risk parts of the browser were also running in shared processes. And actually, I'm going to tell you this part of the story by quoting a paper, Isolating Web Programs in Modern Browser Architectures by Charlie Rice and Steve Gribble from UW from 2009. Quote, today's publishers are deploying web pages that act more like programs than simple documents. And these programs are growing in complexity and demand for resources. Remember, this is 2008, 2009. Most websites at this point are not web apps. They're kind of like, for the most part, sort of static pages you read. Maybe, I have a few sections you can click on. They're not, it was new at the time that web pages were becoming kind of rich and full featured. Current web browser architectures, on the other hand, are still designed primarily for rendering basic pages, in that they do not provide sufficient isolation between concurrently executing programs. As a result, competing programs within the browser encounter many types of interference that affect their fault tolerance, memory management, and performance. Surprisingly, web browsers do not yet have a program abstraction that can be easily isolated. Neither pages nor origins have appropriate isolation boundaries because some groups of pages, even those from different origins, can interact with each other within the browser. Now, from the very beginning, an architectural goal of building Chrome was to try to isolate different parts of the browser from itself, so that the parts of the browser closest to websites were the least privileged and only interacted by well-defined IPC channels with more privileged parts of the browser. And also, as that paper was alluding to, different web principles were isolated from each other. And over the years, over the last, I guess, 12 years since that paper was written. The browser has increased the sophistication and hardness of the isolation primitives until the point today where we have a truly multi-process desktop browser and with different websites that don't have to share processes. Now, the reason why I was quoting from a paper here, instead of just telling it totally my own words, was because I wanted to drive home the point that the idea of a multi-process browser came out of academic research. Charlie Rice and Adam Barth were among the most prolific and well-known web security researchers at the time as students and postdocs. And then they joined the early Chrome team right at the beginning of Chrome's creation and brought their ideas with them. And, I think Charlie in particular had this audacious research vision that, took maybe 10 years of engineering to fully complete. All right, so I promised that there were two problems. The first one that I was just talking about is separation of principals. The second one was that extensions and add-ons as they existed at the time in other browsers were a big mess. I.e. add-ons were often malicious and they could take over your whole computer pretty readily. Firefox extensions were better, but still a constant source of pain. A major challenge was that a vulnerability in a popular Firefox extension could mean a whole browser exploit. And unfortunately, extensions were often vulnerable. They're not written with the same amount of care as the rest of the browser. Chrome therefore launched a new extension model with two key parts. The first was that extensions run with a restricted set of privileges, and they have to ask for user permission to go beyond that. Second, extensions were split into two parts. The parts that interact with the website has to interact with the more privileged part of the extension with special privileges through a narrow interface, giving a layer of defense. Now, again, this was primarily viewed as an engineering problem that was heavily influenced by academic research. Adam Barth worked on this as he was finishing up his postdoc and then as a new Google employee. And I helped him out on the extension model while I was still a grad student at Berkeley. In fact, you can read a paper if you want to learn more about this, the origin of the Chrome extension model. It's called Protecting Browsers from Extension Vulnerabilities. An additional thing that was new about Chrome at the time that seems like total table stakes now is that Chrome was also the first browser to ship on a relatively short release schedule, every 6 weeks, instead of once a year. Most of Google was shipping websites that released weekly or even daily or maybe multiple times a day. So the engineers who built Chrome thought 6 weeks would be a very reasonable cadence for launching a browser. And today we release every 4 weeks. Today, this sounds slow, by the way, releasing every 4 weeks, but at the time, it's sort of a big deal to have a browser that would be auto-updating on this kind of rapid cadence. So if I had to characterize the early day engineering challenges that Chrome had, I'd say that they were mostly technical problems. They were problems that we could reason about from first principles as engineers or by observing how software worked. We didn't really have to understand much about the user base or developers beyond what we knew from our own intuition as us as users, us as developers. And another thing that characterized this early time period was that the team was very influenced by ideas from academic researchers who joined industry to build those ideas out. And at the time, Google was like, hey, yeah, sure, we'll hire you to build that crazy thing that sounds really hard to do. Sure, why not? And I'm glad they did that, or I wouldn't be here today. All right, so let's move on now to the early 2010s. The early 2010s were the start of the mobile era. Early adopters had smartphones for a few years by then in the early 2010s, but lots of other people were getting phones for the first time, or maybe even internet access for the first time via a smartphone. And even among the early adopters, people didn't use their phones all day the way that they do today. Phones were still a bit clumsy and kludgy, kind of going through teenage growing pains. And in this era, Chrome launched on Android and iOS in June 2012. Two challenges characterized this era. And the first was, how do you turn a desktop browser into a mobile browser? I mean that technically speaking. How do you do it? You've got more memory constraints. You might not be able to have as many processes. In the case of iOS, there were restrictions on what we could ship as a browser by Apple. Lots of questions around how to actually build a browser. But how do you turn a desktop browser into a mobile browser is also a product problem. You have a tiny screen. You can't see the whole URL. How do you take this big screen browser concept and squish it into a tiny little screen? As an aside, I don't think we've solved this question yet, to be honest. You'll see that Chrome Mobile periodically changes how and where you switch between tabs, or we change around what type of content is on the new tab page, or we change what the browser does when you tap on the icon to first open it. And the reason we're changing these, why this is something you still see evolving today, is because Chrome is still trying to adapt, in my opinion, to the new mobile era and shed the last vestiges of originally coming from a desktop browser mindset. How do you turn a desktop browser into a mobile browser? There's also the web content itself. Websites are sometimes unreadable or unusable on small phones, tiny text, weird layout that doesn't resize, buttons that you can't actually press with your finger. These problems aren't too common these days, at least probably not in the countries that likely you here, this audience, is using the web on, because most web developers now know about responsive design, but they didn't always design that way. So at the time, as the team is thinking about how to launch a mobile browser, we were building features into the browser to resize text, change the layout, simplify pages, and so on to make websites usable. There's also an outreach aspect of this, reaching out to developers to try to get them to follow best practices for mobile devices, telling people, hey, here's what you should be doing. Please do this, please do this, please make your website work on mobile. Really, though, it just eventually became obvious to the majority of web developers that their traffic was coming on smartphones, so they fixed their websites to work better on phones. Now, in your free time, after trying to figure out how to turn a desktop browser into a mobile browser, you could also worry about challenge number 2 that characterized this era. How do we compete with apps? The web was built to be this super safe place where you could visit a website and then leave it like it never happened. Wouldn't be rummaging around in your contacts or deleting your documents folder by accident or whatever. So this model is safe, but also limiting. Mobile apps, in contrast, were like somewhere in between. They're not as privileged as desktop executables that could burn the whole thing down, but they were more privileged and therefore more powerful than apps, than websites. So we face this tension between offering websites richer APIs so that they could stay relevant, so they could compete with apps, but also sticking to the implied promise of safety that we offer to users whenever they load a web page. And navigating this tension often involved asking users what they wanted to do or informing them about the privileges that the website wanted to have. Now, one thing you should notice is that these problems that I'm talking about in this era are largely about people. They're technical problems, sure, but they're also very much about what end users want, what people expect, what makes software usable, and how developers behave. And right around this time, mid-2010s, we now get to the rise of India. According to Statista, only 2% of Indians had smartphones in 2010. By 2016, it was 20%. Do you know what 20% of 1.4 billion is? It's a lot, 280 million people. For comparison, the US in 2016 had 192 million smartphone users. A lot more people in India using the internet than the United States. And of course, we could see that trend in India going up much faster than in the United States, just because the market opportunity, there are a lot more people in India to begin adopting smartphones than the United States. Now, in its earliest days, the Chrome product team built a browser for themselves as both end users and as web developers. That meant pretty much they were building for knowledge workers with great educations. They're building for people working in offices, maybe using their laptops all day, kind of a smartphone just as a second accessory. People who are living in California, who spoke English. Now, when the problems you start facing, like the ones I was just talking about, what you expect out of a mobile browser, how you expect a mobile browser to work, when those problems are about people and the people that you're trying to reason about aren't necessarily like you, they have different constraints, they have different expectations, you're going to start running into trouble unless you can expand your worldview pretty fast. And there were some very important ways that Indians were different from the Californian Chrome product team in the mid-2010s, by the way, which did include a number of people who had immigrated from India, but they themselves were living in California and in many ways shared the characteristics of Californians. So like thinking about just people in California versus kind of the large group of smartphone users in India, there were some pretty important differences. The first is that they weren't using Chrome. They were using another browser called UC Browser, which immediately made it pretty clear that we weren't serving their needs. UC Browser is built by a Chinese company, and it was built with India as a market in mind. Second, a lot of these people were coming online for the first time with phones. They weren't coming from a desktop world. They didn't have preconceived notions about how desktop software worked. Concepts like tabs, windows, URLs, file navigation weren't concepts they already had. Now, of course, this isn't true. India is a huge and very diverse country. There are a lot of knowledge workers, software engineers in India. But thinking about the large group of people, tens of millions of people who are just coming online for the first time in India, this was a characteristic of that particular group. And third, there are many Indians who speak little to no English. And in that era, their phones likely were set to English for a variety of reasons about, what software packs were offered on phones, to, sometimes stores would set them up for people and would set the language to English and not ask them, what language they wanted their phone to be in, and they wouldn't know how to change it because once the phone is in the wrong language, it's pretty hard to change it to the right one. So, lots of people, tens of millions of people stuck using our English UI and getting English websites without necessarily actually really comfortably or fluently reading English. And fourth, data was very expensive and slow relative to a middle-class Indian's income. This has changed. Data's gotten a lot less expensive in India, but at the time, people were frequently running out of data because it was so expensive. And this matters when you're thinking about how big can my browser binary be? How often will people be willing to download that big binary to update? Are websites too big and too slow? Our competitors like UC Browser were doing a much better job at saving people data. And this is the era when Chrome really started using user research and data science to drive product decisions. I went to India along with a lot of my colleagues. We spoke to people to understand how they use our product, what they wanted out of our product. And our excellent user research team helped us get insight into people's lived experiences and problems with our software. Engineers did great technical work in response to these problems, but in my memory, this time period was defined by the shift towards user research and data science. And also this is the time period when we really started building out those functions. Before then, we didn't have a data science team. This is when we realized we needed to start building that muscle. We need to start building up a data science team. Now today, Chrome is a huge browser. Billions of active Chrome installs that map to billions of people around the world are running every moment, every month, every day. And most of the challenges that I think about today stem from the challenges of that scale. So I'm going to share 3 of those challenges that we're struggling with right now. The first is, how do we understand our users? Our user population is so incredibly diverse, ranging from an elderly person living a nomadic lifestyle in a desert to a teenage DJ in Manhattan who grew up with a smartphone in her hands.
I think video conferencing, yes, on the web, it's necessary. It's not sufficient, but it's necessary. And yet it wasn't being adopted. And in part based on that experience of just going outside of the security bubble, I recognized that the business case for HTTPS hadn't really been made. And so how do you think about the performance trade-offs, the revenue trade-offs that people were worried about? Even just incentivizing this work among all the other different things people were doing. And so HTTPS was, to me, absolutely a security first initiative, but also really important in building my empathy for how important it is to think about security alongside all this other constraints and complexity. And I love that, because I think, all important worldwide impactful problems, they have complexity inherent in them. And I love working with different people to kind of wrangle that and push things forward.
Is there a perception side to this, where there's sort of like what is really happening from a security standpoint, and then kind of the public discourse, or kind of what a user might perceive as like the most important, security concerns?
Oh.
Sort of a gap between, what you and your team are actually dealing with, and then sort of what we all might be talking about on Twitter.
Yes, I think there is. And, you sort of talk about like, if it bleeds, it leads. And so things tend to be dramatized, and especially sort of titles of articles tend to be dramatized, when in reality, sort of the threats that are really facing people day to day tend to be more mundane. And so I think, when people in my family are worried about an advanced persistent threat or some type of, very sophisticated, well-funded hacker, I'm like, let's just make sure you have two-factor auth set up on your accounts. Like, you don't need to worry about the spies and the sophisticated hackers you're watching on TV or even hearing about as newsfeed. So I do think there's a gap. For a while, I worked on a team of hired hackers. And I think when people hear the term hacker, they think of, the antisocial geek who's trying to kind of bring down large governments in a maniacal way, and or profiting off of people. And I work with hackers who fundamentally want to understand how to break systems, but to make them more secure. And so I do think there's a huge perception gap. I will also acknowledge that I love watching movies and TV shows about cybersecurity, and I don't think I would love them as much if they actually, reflected the mundaneness of the work. And so sometimes I feel bad when I'm talking to the public and they're kind of saying like, what's a day in your life? And expecting that I'm kind of like blocking packets on like an Ethernet cable or forwarding. Unfortunately, like the work it's very interdisciplinary. We work together. It goes slower than reality. So I do think there's a perception gap. I recognize it probably is the case, with most fields. My mom was a nurse, so she kind of looked to ER and was very judgy of how that was represented. And so yes, there's a perception gap. And a lot of what I talk about for security is safe defaults. When it comes to enterprise environment, like, don't reinvent the wheel if you don't have to. As much as possible, we try to build in to Chrome, into sort of our central management solutions, the security, and make it easy. Because if it's not easy, no one's going to use it. I don't know. Don't believe everything you read.
Hey, I was with you until that last part, and I would say you can believe Forbes. But we actually got our first question in from the audience that I think really kind of continues this theme. And the question is, why for a lot of developers or vendors in this cloud world, is security kind of an afterthought or something that they think about, at the end, or sort of secondary to some other objectives? And is there anything that could happen either from a bigger standpoint or within sort of how these organizations work, where it would be thought about more prominently and more early?
It's a great question. I think there's a human element to it. I took risks in my younger life that maybe I wouldn't have now with the benefit of wisdom. And so I think there is a human element to kind of thinking about short-term benefit as opposed to sort of long-term risk. We see this, with people's health choices and exercise choices and a lot of different life choices. And so I think part of it is that, people near-term want to focus on growth or revenue or these things that have like very material benefit, and security is squishier. Security, quality, these things are squishier. It's very hard to objectively measure. So I think there's a human element to it. I think we have to kind of acknowledge that and then sort of address it. And one of the things, I've done in my career is actually to try to convince people the earlier you think about it, the cheaper it's going to be to actually do. If you start thinking about security at the design phase, as opposed to like when you have a public incident, which absolutely has put startups out of business, impacts brand reputation, can introduce kind of legal challenges and costs. Like you don't want to think of it then. And so in some ways I sort of share anecdotes of like, hey, you don't want to be this long stream of examples, like think about it early, invest in it early. I feel like empathy building is really important. And I think security teams sometimes get a rap of the team that's always saying no. And so developers then just like don't want to interact with security folks because all they're doing is saying no, as opposed to like really working in partnership. And so, within Chrome, our security team, they're an engineering team and they have to fix bugs and they have to build features. And sometimes they introduce security issues. So they actually have an empathy and understanding of how challenging it is to do that. At the same time, all other engineering teams, like they will own the pager for their security issues. And so I think thinking about accountability, building up empathy is important so that security is not relegated to this like checkmark thing that's considered at the end is really important. And your investment in security scales. I've talked with startups and they're kind of 5-person startups and they're thinking about how they protect themselves from, again, like advanced persistent threats. And I'm like, you don't need to worry about that. Like here are 3 things you should worry about right now. And then like try to build a business because like you only got so much money and so much time to do that. And so I think scaling security investment as things evolve makes it challenging as well. We have to kind of adapt to the times. And that to me is where like, if your core business is not security, I'm like, of course I want you to use Chrome because this is our core business is building a secure product, is building secure central management. So use us or use someone else where the core business is security. But it's complex and hard. And if that's not your core business, depend on someone else so that it doesn't all fall on your shoulders to figure out.
Yeah, but I could imagine a bit of a challenge where if you're on that team or even kind of broadly at a place like Chrome, like it's probably more noticeable when things break than when they're working. And to say, oh, invest in security early because it'll be cheaper, you're going against a counterfactual of like how costly it would be if things actually went bad, right? And so I can imagine there's a bit of an intellectual challenge there to be like, no, be excited about the non-event, right? Like if no news is good news in a way, right?
Yeah, no, you're totally right. I use anecdotes and proof points. So within our security team, we have people build proof of concept exploits and show like, hey, this isn't just a theoretical threat. Like we actually had an engineer on our team who within a day has built something where if you click it, you can be compromised. Aren't you glad that we did it within our team as opposed to some external attacker? Let's address it now. So sometimes it is like, how do you make it real? I will say I come from a place of privilege within Google because we've invested in security and I haven't had to make that, like the case hasn't been that hard to make because I think that trust is just so important in everything that we do. But I acknowledge that other developers, they are, that is part of the job. It is not just the engineering piece, but how do you convince other people that they should spend less time on all the things that they're doing, which is important, and more time on security. And I do think things are changing. 20 years ago, security was just sort of, I don't know, fun prank. Now it's top of mind for everyone, whether it comes to, keeping my business running, accessing critical services, elections, kind of communication, confidential communications. And so I think it's easier now than 2 decades ago, but totally acknowledge the challenge the developers face.
So we're almost out of time, incredibly, but I did want to look at the poll that we had the audience fill out. So the results show that the most folks, 50% of respondents expect to be in a hybrid but mostly remote situation come January, with about 29 to 30% planning to still be fully remote. Only 8% expect to be fully back in the office. Does that surprise you at all? And as you and your teams are building Chrome, in the months to come, does that change kind of how you think about your user base, knowing that they're going to be in at least this, mostly hybrid reality?
It doesn't surprise me. I do feel like, though I have the benefit of like the Ask the Audience, and so that would have been my guess too. I don't think it changes how we focus on things, other than to know that like there's not a normal that we're going to be returning to, which is hard in some ways, because I miss my old life. I'm still grieving from some of that routine, and but it doesn't surprise me, and I think it only gives me more conviction about how we're prioritizing helping enterprise users that are going to be working from their browser, or already working from their browser for most of their time, but are going to continue to be doing that from their own personal office for a long time. And so while I would love to return to a new normal in January, I have no expectation of doing that at Google or in the rest of the world. And I also think just the flexibility that the pandemic has allowed people to experience, leaders to experience, frontline workers to experience, is something that is going to transform how we do work, how we access the web. And so while sad for personal reasons, I think it actually just gives me more conviction in what we're working on.
That makes sense. Parisa, thank you so much for the expertise and the wide-ranging insights this morning. It was really a pleasure.
Thank you. Ditto. Nice to talk to you again.
Awesome. Well, we hope everyone enjoys the rest of today.
Thank you, Alex and Parisa, for that engaging conversation. Now, as we look to discuss new ways to harness the power of the web, we'd like to ask another poll. In Slido, tell us what has been the biggest technology challenge over the past 6 months for your organization. A, enabling and maintaining a distributed workforce. B, ensuring security measures meet changing work styles. C, handling major fluctuations in demand for products and services. Now, please welcome moderator Angel O. Young, staff writer Forbes, and panelist Adrian Schutte, Global Change Director, PwC, Sri Shivananda, Chief Technology Officer, PayPal, and Parisa Tabriz, Senior Director of Engineering, Google.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. So we're about 6 months into the pandemic, and among all the tumultuous changes that we're going through, that we were already going through, we're now dealing, with the most part, with a global remote workforce. And even before COVID-19 hit, a lot of the work that was happening in the office was pretty much already being conducted on the web. But now, in this time that we're living in, the web is the new office. And with that comes a new set of challenges. So to review what those challenges are and how we've solved for them, we have Parisa, Adrian, and Sri. Thanks so much for joining me today. So I wanted to kick off the conversation with a question for all three of you, which is, what specific strategies and technologies in the web have you used to enable and maintain a distributed workforce? Let's start with Sri.
Great, I'll go first. One is, we are blessed to be a digitally native company. In terms of being able to work from home, the journey didn't start when the pandemic did. It started many years ago, and some portions of our workforce always worked remotely. But even for someone like us, when March hit, it was overnight that we made a decision that everyone is going to work from home. And that meant so many different challenges. We had a portion of the workforce, particularly in our customer service, that was not enabled for remote work. And in a 2-week period, we had to enable all of them to be productive from home. Many different things in terms of tech, collaboration tech, and security and so on, but I'll focus primarily on security. What happened with remote work is all of a sudden you went from the perimeter for your security being your offices to now being people's homes. In fact, not even just people's homes, but people themselves. To make sure that we can continue to stay true to the promise that we have to our customers in protecting all of their information and also to our employees in terms of safeguarding them. We had to ensure that all the security controls that we had put in place for a day like this, which we had never anticipated, actually worked. And that was where we put most of the attention in the first few weeks and actually the first couple of months after the pandemic started.
Parisa, why don't you go next?
Yeah, sure. And I think similar to Shri, like Google's digital native company, my team is heavily distributed as it is. So we have teams kind of in different offices across the Americas and Europe. And so the team was already quite comfortable using chats and, Meet and collaborative online tools like Docs and spreadsheets. This just became the exclusive way that we communicate. And that was a transition, with even in how it impacted Chrome. We really wanted to make sure that knowing Chrome is part of how people use the web, that we kept things robust and resilient as we're building Chrome. And so we actually made some changes to our even release process in lieu of the pandemic to ensure that we didn't disrupt kind of a worldwide workforce that was depending on Chrome. And I think video conferencing has just become so much more important, right? To connect for business meetings for sure, but also even just to stay connected in more casual ways, whether it's, I have a lot of virtual coffees and virtual lunches and virtual happy hours, even with work, so that we can actually have that more casual conversation, which in part is so important for innovation and, or even just, being able to work through problems or vent to each other. And so video conferencing has been so much more important, I think now, but that's a kind of a taste of how we've been relying on digital apps and communication in my world.
And Adrian, how about you?
I'd agree with what Parisa said. The video piece has been so key. We are not a digitally enabled or digitally native company, shall I say. So we've become digitally enabled, and we set ourselves up around 5 years ago to get that way. More than 150 years old. We're at client sites, we're face-to-face all the time. So Chrome has really allowed us, when we shut down everywhere in March, everybody went home, to stay connected both with our teams as well as our clients. So businesses kept moving, so that's been amazing. I would agree with the Meet piece. We're doing around 5 million Meet video conferences a month, which is incredible. I'd also say our chat traffic has gone up quite a bit. It helps that 24-hour kind of around the sun, leave a chat message for folks, and then you can meet up later. So it's been really a game changer for us, but quite a shift for sure.
So I know that Parisa and Shri have said that they work at companies that are digitally native, and Adrian has said that she works at a company that's not. Regardless, what are some of the biggest challenges that the three of you have faced in the last couple of months as the workforce has transitioned on different levels on each of your company? Adrian, why don't you go first?
Sure. So different challenges, I would say we're seeing a lot more people bringing personal, I don't want to say problems, but personal issues, their personal lives to work even more than we've ever seen before. I've met everyone's kids, their dogs, their everything that's going on in their house. And I think that's okay. I think that's made us even more human. I've seen our leaders and our network get even more authentic, which I think has been quite a nice change, but it's very different. It's a whole cultural shift for us. So I think people are adjusting to that. I think there's also the always on. I see people working now more than ever, and productivity is okay, but I'm worried about burnout is now where I'm going. So I'm like, please take vacation, please put on your out of office. And so that's been a challenge. And I think just really asking people and leaning in and being compassionate, bringing your authentic true self to work. And that's also a major shift for a lot of people across the board. I like what you said, Parisa, about grieving. I think everyone's grieving, our old lives. And I think there was an assumption, this will be over in a few months as it goes on and on. I see that more sadness, if you will, and just what will my new life look like. And the browser has become the window to everything, which is quite fascinating.
Yeah, I think the human piece is a huge part of probably all of our jobs as people leaders and team leaders, and leading with both empathy, but also an understanding that we have a responsibility for business continuity. And so how do you find that balance over teams of hundreds of people, and shift as needed, because things change so quickly. And I've talked to my teams even about resilience and, hey, make sure that you're not the single point of failure for any aspect. Like, how are we sharing knowledge across the team to make sure that someone needs to go on leave, that we can continue, in some fashion. So communication, empathy, super, super top of mind. I will say that, we've had the challenge of load and increased demand, or even like hard to predict demand. Whether it's from customers or users, is something we're grappling with. But knowing that you're helping people is also something incredibly motivating. So, there's a hospital in the US that wanted to set up a new field hospital with 200 beds to manage capacity for the pandemic. And it led to some extra hours for our team, but we were able to kind of meet with them, set up a pilot for Chrome's a browser cloud management solution, get them in production within a week. And then they were able to, serve patients greater capacity without having to worry about the technology piece of it. And so I will say that what has been, again, a privilege for me is to, me and team is to know that we're working on something that's important and actually helping people during this time. And so while it's extra time, I think at least people feel that it's purpose driven and helping. And I think that has been something that has kind of helped people get through it, but totally agree with sort of the burnout risk and the people challenges.
So there's a whole customer side of things that I'll not cover right away, but on the employee side of things, I see to some extent very similar to what Adrian and Parisa said, but 4 phases. The first phase was March and April. And it was the sudden shift and shock of saying, like, whoa, can this happen too? Like, how do we cope with this? And so on. And we actually saw a lot of compassion that employees had for each other, people lending a hand. Folks went from just being a professional to being a professional and a parent and a cook and a caregiver, and all at the same time with absolutely no boundaries. And that was too much for people to take. And what we saw was the best of employee community at that time. Then we saw phase 2, where people got adjusted to the new normal, created a little space for themselves to work, using all the great collaboration tools that exist in terms of interacting with each other, collaborating with each other, and so on. It was harder, but they coped with it. And we actually saw a bit of curve of productivity. This is also right around the time when customer traffic was beginning to shoot up as well. Phase 3, I would say, is the beginning of understanding that the lack of the commute and the ease of a video conference, and the fact that anyone can tap on anybody's shoulder virtually and ask a question and interrupt, that started to add to mental stress, lack of boundaries, days extending longer, weeks extending longer, and so on. And I think what we saw during this time, again, is between both employees and also leadership empathy, like Parisa said, way more interaction than we've ever seen before. In fact, people are virtually interacting more than they did physically. In the first weeks of the pandemic, we saw people sharing pictures of their workspace. In the weeks that followed, they started to share pictures about what they were cooking, and then it was pets, and then it was different things over time. And channels like Slack and various other places, people congregated. In fact, we actually have a live DJ show happens every single week on video conference, right? Phase 4 is something none of us know of. None of us can predict when this will be fully back to normal, if there is a normal, like we saw from the survey. And that phase 4 probably by itself is a prolonged phase where there is some re-entry back into the office, some new normals in terms of certain people who want to be permanently remote, such. But to me, if leadership was ever important, it's during this time. It's all about our people, whether they be employees or customers.
Great. So with this new kind of workforce, obviously we've all talked about how there are new challenges. And there's one that I want to talk to you all about, which is security. Parisa, I know you talked a little bit about it with Alex in your previous conversation, but I think, hackers are definitely exploiting this new kind of environment. We've seen more phishing attacks. We've seen new ransomware attacks that have made headlines. They've been attacking research institutions, corporations. So what are some safety measures that your companies have taken to ensure that remote employees can safely do their work from anywhere? Parisa, let's start with you, since you were just talking about it with Alex.
Sure. So many things. I mean, and Chrome has invested in security since we first launched it 12 years ago. I think really making sure that we can meet enterprise IT teams' needs, which can be unique and complex, has come top of mind. So, for example, I'd mentioned in my conversation with Alex, extensions and how these can really help for productivity, they can help for entertainment. We also acknowledge that IT admins really want to be able to manage what their workforce is using in terms of extensions, because they bring enhanced capabilities and power that also can, create risk that wants to be managed. So we've given admins more control over how they can manage extensions in the workforce, because we know that that's a unique need. And we're continuing to kind of evolve that based on their feedback as to what works, what's most important for them, what, have we rolled out that actually doesn't really work well, and then how can we improve that? So extension management is for sure one piece. I think yesterday, 2 days ago, we announced for advanced protection users in Chrome. So these are users that actually opt into advanced protection because they themselves self-identify as having heightened risk. Journalists, politicians, business leaders, that will be doing additional scanning for any downloads that they make in Chrome, because we know that that's a very common vector. And advanced protection users are also using two-factor auth, so they're much more protected from phishing attacks in the first place. But recognizing that, people who are sophisticated attackers are going to other vectors. And so, I think we're continuing to invest in security and giving just a range of options that I think people can use in a way that best fits them for work, for home, and kind of in your own risk profile.
Shri, why don't you go next?
Yeah, I think Parisa said this before. We are all in the business of trust with our customers, and security, therefore, in fact, at PayPal and technology, security is the #1 priority. Security is the first thing you think of in anything you do. Because if you don't have trust, you don't have a relationship, you don't have engagement, you don't have a business, right? When it comes to security, particularly with both with our customer base and the employee base, we've taken various measures well ahead of the pandemic, but we've made sure that they've actually worked much better during the pandemic as well. I'll give you some simple examples from an employee perspective that are very relevant. #1 is to make sure that you have secure authentication. Like you have a single way of signing on to every single application that you use, no matter where you go, whether it's a cloud service or an on-prem service and such. Making multi-factor a default. And multi-factor is not just that one-time password, but it's also various other variables on like maybe the geolocation of the employee themselves to make sure that their identity is not being used by somebody else. Phishing controls, which is block most of the phishing emails out in the perimeter, but sometimes they will land in the inbox. And when they do, you add a little notice at the top of the email to say, hey, this is from an external sender. By the way, this has a link, so please be careful. Or for that matter, prefixing the link to make sure even if they click, they're still protected. Making sure that their devices have the right kind of antivirus controls and so on, and fully up to date at all times, and the latest rules and software have been rolled out. So doing various different things to where, on the one hand, you protect everyone in spite of ourselves, but at the same time, use awareness to make sure that, hey, look, we are in a new security normal. That has not been what it's been in the past. And that means it takes all of us together to secure ourselves and to secure our customers the way they desire and deserve.
I would build on what Shri said. I love what you're saying about the visual cues and the notifications, and I think that's really helpful to employees. We too, protecting our clients' data is job one. We're very, very serious about that. Our clients trust us with all kinds of data being highly regulated. It's really important. So we do a number of things in our firm. First of all, we have our own world-class security group that is top of it and always investing and always growing. But I think combined with all the security that's in Chrome is quite a great story to keep us secure. I can't remember the last time I actually saw something that didn't go to spam that was supposed to go to spam, but if I did see something questionable, I see a big bar across the top, so it's very clear to me. So I do appreciate that. Say other things we do as a firm, we don't allow any external USB devices to our PCs, which is quite critical, so we can't download or upload. We block all the upload sites and those kind of things. So, I like what you said, Shri. We protect ourselves in spite of ourselves, but it is very important. I also appreciate the extensions. So while our users can sometimes get confused, why can't I use this? I can download it home. Our story is always, our enterprise environment is not the same as your home environment. And by the way, we recommend you also don't download that one at home because FYI, there's a bit of an issue. So it is part education, part visual, but then also part physical with security.
Awesome. So I wanted to bring in the audience right now. So we asked them a poll question, which was, what's been your biggest tech challenge in the last 6 months? And an overwhelming 55% said enabling and maintaining a distributed workforce was the biggest challenge. And with that, there's actually another question from the audience that I think plays in really well with this, which is, how do you manage a development environment remotely with the type of access that is required for such positions? Shri, why don't we start with you for that question?
Yeah, so what we've actually done at PayPal is we have a fairly standardized software development lifecycle process. So where our code is stored is very common for every team in the company. How a build and release happens is very similar for all teams in the company. Where the deployment occurs, the tools that they use are the same, how they collaborate is the same. And what that has done is there's a consistency in the tools and standards and experiences that our engineers and developers use across the world. What we have seen is when you look at the software development lifecycle, there are many different phases. You start by thinking and designing, then you go into writing code, then you build and test it, and then you put it in front of the customer and you experience it. What we've seen during the pandemic is everything from writing code forward is just as it was before. In fact, we've actually seen the number of builds and releases go up at PayPal. That said, that leftmost portion, which is the design, think and design portion, it's instantaneous through collaboration. It's two ideas colliding and making one. It is whiteboarding and like scratching on paper or whatever it may be. That is something that people miss. So we've been out there looking for technologies that will help us do virtual whiteboarding, and where we can still create a bit of a brainstorm environment, even though we are not in person. But here's what I'll tell you. I think the thing is, we've all been in meetings in the past where we're sitting down and you turn to a person, you make eye contact, you have a conversation. The magic of that has been somewhat impossible to create on the video conference. So while there are many things that have worked similarly or to some extent slightly better I'll say there are certain aspects of the software development lifecycle that's been a bit of a challenge.
I'll add, and again, this kind of goes back to coming from a place of privilege that I recognize a lot of people working in distributed work environments do not have, and that Google is quite digital native. Chrome is distributed across over 20 offices worldwide. And so we are used to building from, we have a cloud-based business, and we've worked in this way for so long. We have remote build, we have test automation. That's actually been one area of increased investment and challenge early on, where we had people who would, manually test Chrome on this whole suite of Android devices and iOS devices and Windows devices and Mac devices and Chromebooks. And so finding a way to actually bring even more of that infrastructure and testing into the cloud so people could do it from home has been one area of increased investment. But we do come from a place where most people are doing their work building Chrome from within Chrome, or from already having access to kind of cloud-based services. And so other businesses who've actually made those investments into cloud-based services where there is central management, and hey, you can do that central management even from home, are in an ideal situation now with the pandemic. And I'm seeing more people make those investments now, which is great, because it's going to set them up for what I don't expect to ever completely change. So I am not surprised by the kind of audience response, and recognize how much challenge there is, especially if you're working in an organization that hasn't invested in sort of that cloud-backed environment. And totally agree with Sri around still not being able to reproduce the serendipitous conversations, the ones that aren't like intentional and scheduled, whether it's over a coffee or live in the Bay Area, so we always have great weather. Normally, we can walk around and have some of those conversations. We're having some air quality issues right now too. And that's the thing that actually technology hasn't been able to totally replace. But so much has been possible with Chrome, central Chrome browser management, and other just cloud-backed services.
I'd say even though we're not having the privilege of being digitally native, we've done an amazing job moving to the cloud. And really that journey started about 6 years ago. So I think all those development cycles, a lot of that has already moved to the cloud. We are distributed all over the world, 156 countries. So I think that hasn't really changed so much. And I think that's standardized, and that we have processes and procedures for all the things we do. I agree with you about the serendipitous conversations. I like the way you said that. That's a little harder, especially with our clients and the people we serve. We've had to radically reimagine how we do things, whether it's winning work, serving clients. We have a whole organization within PwC that has helped us reimagine that and really change the game around all those activities that we used to do with clients one-on-one. It's been quite amazing to see that reimagination in such a short time, and upskilling people to take what they've put out into the universe and say, how do 60,000, 70,000, 80,000 people learn all these techniques and be effective and continue to do what we do? It's been so successful recently. I'd say our clients are going, hey, how are you doing this? Teach us, tell us, show us how. So it's been very well received.
I think it's incredible for me to hear sort of even, Adrian, some of what you've shared, because can you imagine like the founders, 150-year-old plus company, can you imagine the founders if they could see kind of how PwC was working today, and just hearing about that transition during a crisis and how people have had to make quick decisions, but technology has worked. And I'm sure, again, there've been hiccups, no doubt, in sort of making some of those change. But for me, I love hearing the customer stories who, again, maybe don't come from the same privilege as me and Sri of kind of like working that way already for some time, but to hear how that works, because I actually do think it will make those businesses so much more effective and flexible and able to adapt as situation demands, as their employees' needs demand going forward. And I don't think that acceleration would have happened otherwise. And again, I'm not saying that like I'm grateful for the pandemic, but I try to find the silver lining in all the things. And I do think that, that has accelerated and given some disruption to kind of how businesses use technology, how they use the web, how they use browsers in a way that is encouraging to see.
I think in a lot of ways, though, it's made us push the boundaries of what we thought was possible. We see our business people, our administrative people, our most junior people, even our most senior people going, what if we did this and that? And those what if questions, we're usually, not that we're not busy now, but we've had to say what if, where before what if was when we get time. And that's led to unbelievable solutions and quite things that have come out to surprise and delight both internally within our company and our clients. So it's pretty amazing to see.
Yeah, I'll just add one more point, triggered by a couple of thoughts that Adrian and Parisa shared. There's been a ton of innovation during this time. We happen to do an annual 2-day event called the PayPal Expo. And PayPal Expo is the place where people can bring in all the innovations they're working on and share that. We do this as a physical event in an area called the Town Hall on the PayPal campus. We have 6,000 people who come through that area in a 2-day period. And this year we go, okay, what are we going to do about it? And a set of employees and leaders came up with the idea of creating a extended reality experience to do exactly the same thing. And so far, and this time it was not a local San Jose event, because it was virtual, it was a global event. It included then every participant you could imagine, curated. We've now had more than 9,000 people go through that experience and experience 60,000 things in a matter of like a week and a half. And some of that will become a part of the new reality as well. Spaces to congregate and exchange ideas and collaborate together, but through using extended reality experiences, which is amazing to see the kind of innovation that comes bottoms up when you apply constraints of the kind that nobody can control, like the pandemic.
So, you guys all just talked about this, but yes, we've gone through a challenging couple months, but we've all sort of risen up and we've met the challenge. And I think we can all agree that this move to remote work has been more successful than not. And so, in the last audience poll, Alex polled the audience and they said that they were expecting a hybrid model for the next year. So, looking towards the future, are you all confident that we are well prepared for that type of a workforce? Adrian, why don't you go first with that?
For a hybrid model workforce, I think we are. I think the desire for people to get back together. I know I'm dying to see my team. My team goes from Melbourne, Australia to Houston, Texas, and I just want to see them and have a drink with them. So I think we're well prepared. I think that desire is there. I think there's always going to be some people who are not ready for a variety of reasons, emotional, physical, health-wise, et cetera. But I think we're looking like we're in good shape. We're learning a lot.
You said we, Angel, and so I was going to say, like, who do you mean by we? Chrome is, we're working in this way. And again, I want to see my team too, but we are productive and we can work this way. The technology is available. The web is ready. There's always change aversion. And so I do think that like a crisis can sort of kind of shock the system and make you step back and think about that. And so I think the technology is available. Chrome is ready. Of course, we will continue to innovate. And so to me, it's just a question of people wanting to invest in the future, recognizing, that that's going to be some risk in and of itself. Of course, like status quo is safe. And so doing something new and different is risky, but the technology is ready. Chrome is ready. We have the solutions. And so I think it's a question of, whether you're individual or organization are
beginning of a new field.
Hi Ian, thanks a lot for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me, Andrew. I'm glad to be here.
Cool. Today, you're one of the world's most visible deep learning researchers. I'd like to ask you to share a bit about your personal story. So how do you end up doing this work that you now do?
Yeah, that sounds great. I guess I first became interested in machine learning right before I met you, actually. I had been working on neuroscience, and my undergraduate advisor, Jerry Kane at Stanford, encouraged me to take your Intro to AI class.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
So I had always thought that AI was a good idea, but that in practice, the main thing I knew that was happening was like game AI, where people have a lot of hard-coded rules for non-player characters in games to say different scripted lines at different points in time. And then when I took your Intro to AI class, and you covered topics like linear regression and the bias and variance decomposition of the error of linear regression, I started to realize that this was a real science, and I could actually have a scientific career in AI rather than neuroscience.
I see. Oh, great. And then what happened?
Well, I came back and I TA'd your course later.
I see, right.
And
great TA.
so a really big turning point for me was while I was TAing that course, one of the students, my friend Ethan Dreyfus, got interested in Jeff Hinton's Deep Belief Net paper.
I see.
And the two of us ended up building one of the first GPU CUDA-based machines at Stanford in order to run Boltzmann machines in our spare time over winter break. And at that point, I started to have a very strong intuition that deep learning was the way to go in the future. That a lot of the other algorithms I was working with, like support vector machines, didn't seem to have the right asymptotics. That you add more training data and they get slower. Or for the same amount of training data, it's hard to make them perform a lot better by changing other settings. And at that point, I started to focus on deep learning as much as possible.
And then in the, I remember Rajat Raina's very old GPU paper, right, acknowledges you for having done a lot of early work.
Yeah. That was written using some of the machines that we built. The first machine I built was just something that Ethan and I built at Ethan's mom's house with our own money, and then later we used lab money to build the first 2 or 3 for the Stanford lab.
Wow, that's great. I never knew that story. That's great. And then today, one of the things that's really taken the deep learning world by storm is your invention of GANs. So how did you come up with that?
I'd been studying generative models for a long time. So GANs are a way of doing generative modeling where you have a lot of training data and you'd like to learn to produce more examples that resemble the training data, but they're imaginary. They've never been seen exactly in that form before. There were several other ways of doing generative models that had been popular for several years before I had the idea for GANs. And after I'd been working on all those other methods throughout most of my PhD, I knew a lot about the advantages and disadvantages of all the other frameworks like Boltzmann machines and sparse coding and all the other approaches that had been really popular for years. I was looking for something that would avoid all of those disadvantages at the same time. And then finally, when I was arguing about generative models with my friends in a bar, something clicked into place. And I started telling them, you need to do this, this, and this, and I swear it'll work. And my friends didn't believe me that it would work. I was supposed to be writing the deep learning textbook at the time, but I believed strongly enough that it would work that I went home and coded it up the same night, and it worked.
So it took you one evening to implement the first version of GANs.
I implemented it around midnight after going home from the bar where my friend had his going away party.
I see.
And the first version of it worked, which is very, very fortunate. I didn't have to search for hyperparameters or anything.
There was a story I read it somewhere where you had a near-death experience and that reaffirmed your commitment to AI. Tell me that story.
So, yeah, I wasn't actually near death, but I briefly thought that I was. I had a very bad headache, and some of the doctors thought that I might have a brain hemorrhage. And during the time that I was waiting for my MRI results to find out whether I had a brain hemorrhage or not, I realized that most of the thoughts I was having were about making sure that other people would eventually try out the research ideas that I had at the time. In retrospect, they're all pretty silly research ideas. But at that point, I realized that this was actually one of my highest priorities in life was carrying out my machine learning research work.
I see, yeah. That's great, that when you thought you might be dying soon, you're just thinking how to get the research done.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's commitment.
Yeah.
Yeah. So today you're still at the center of a lot of the activities with GANs, with generative adversarial networks. So tell me how you see the future of GANs.
Right now, GANs are used for a lot of different things, like semi-supervised learning, generating training data for other models, and even simulating scientific experiments. In principle, all of these things could be done by other kinds of generative models. So I think that GANs are at an important crossroads right now. Right now, they work well some of the time, but it can be more of an art than a science to really bring that performance out of them. It's more or less how people felt about deep learning in general 10 years ago. And back then we were using deep belief networks with Boltzmann machines as the building blocks. They were very, very finicky. Over time we switched to things like rectified linear units and batch normalization, and deep learning became a lot more reliable. If we can make GANs become as reliable as deep learning has become, then I think we'll keep seeing GANs used in all the places they're used today with much greater success. If we aren't able to figure out how to stabilize GANs, then I think their main contribution to the history of deep learning is that they will have shown people how to do all of these tasks that involve generative modeling, and eventually we'll replace them with other forms of generative models. So I spend maybe about 40% of my time right now working on stabilizing GANs.
I see, cool, yeah, great. Oh, and so just as a lot of people, they joined deep learning about 10 years ago, such as yourself, wound up being pioneers, maybe the people that join GANs today, if it works out, could end up the early pioneers.
Yeah, a lot of people already are early pioneers of GANs, and I think if you wanted to give any kind of history of GANs so far, you'd really need to mention other groups like Indico and Facebook and Berkeley for all the different things that they've done.
So in addition to all your research, you also co-authored a book on deep learning. How is that going?
So that's right. With Yoshua Bengio and Aaron Corville, who were my PhD co-advisors, we wrote the first textbook on the modern version of deep learning. And that has been very popular both in the English edition and the Chinese edition. We've sold about, I think, around 70,000 copies total between those two languages. And I've had a lot of feedback from students who say that they've learned a lot from it. One thing that we did a little bit differently than some other books is we start with a very focused introduction to the kind of math that you need to do deep learning. I think one thing that I got from your courses at Stanford is that linear algebra and probability are very important, that people get excited about the machine learning algorithms. But if you want to be a really excellent practitioner, you've got to master the basic math that underlies the whole approach in the first place. So we made sure to give a very focused presentation of the math basics at the start of the book. That way you don't need to go out and learn all of linear algebra, but you can get a very quick crash course in the pieces of linear algebra that are the most useful for deep learning.
So even someone whose math, is a little shaky or haven't seen the math for a few years, would be able to start from the beginning of your book and get that background and get into deep learning.
All of the facts that you would need to know are there. It would definitely take some focused effort to practice at making use of them.
Yeah, great.
If someone's really afraid of math, it might be a bit of a painful experience. But if you're ready for the learning experience and you believe you can master it, I think all the tools that you need are there.
As someone that's worked in deep learning for a long time, I'd be curious, if you look back over the years, tell me a bit about how your thinking of AI and of deep learning has evolved over the years.
10 years ago, I felt like as a community, the biggest challenge in machine learning was just how to get it working for AI-related tasks at all. We had really good tools that we could use for simpler tasks where we wanted to recognize patterns in hand-extracted features, where a human designer could do a lot of the work by creating those features and then hand it off to the computer. And that was really good for different things like predicting which ads a user would click on, or different kinds of basic scientific analysis. But we really struggled to do anything involving millions of pixels in an image or a raw audio waveform, where the system had to build all of its understanding from scratch. we finally got over that hurdle really thoroughly maybe 5 years ago. And now we're at a point where there are so many different paths open that someone who wants to get involved in AI, maybe the hardest problem they face is choosing which path they want to go down. Do you want to make reinforcement learning work as well as supervised learning works? Do you want to make unsupervised learning work as well as supervised learning works? Do you want to make sure that machine learning algorithms are fair and don't reflect biases that we prefer to avoid? Do you want to make sure that the societal issues surrounding AI work out well, that we are able to make sure that AI benefits everyone rather than causing social upheaval and trouble with loss of jobs? I think right now there's just really an amazing amount of different things that can be done, both to prevent downsides from AI, but also to make sure that we leverage all of the upsides that it offers us.
And so today there are a lot of people wanting to get into AI. So what advice would you have for someone like that?
I think a lot of people that want to get into AI start thinking that they absolutely need to get a PhD or some other kind of credential like that. I don't think that's actually a requirement anymore. One way that you could get a lot of attention is to write good code and put it on GitHub. If you have an interesting project that solves a problem that someone working at a top lab wanted to solve, once they find your GitHub repository, they'll come find you and ask you to come work there. A lot of the people that I've hired or recruited at OpenAI last year or at Google this year, I first became interested in working with them because of something that I saw that they'd released in open source form on the internet. Writing papers and putting them on archive can also be good. A lot of the time, it's harder to reach the point where you have something polished enough to really be a new academic contribution to the scientific literature. But you can often get to the point of having a useful software product much earlier.
Cool. So sort of, read your book, practice the materials, and post on GitHub and maybe on archive.
I think if you learn by reading the book, it's really important to also work on a project at the same time, to either choose some way of applying machine learning to an area that you're already interested in. Like if you're a field biologist and you want to get into deep learning, maybe you could use it to identify birds. Or if you don't have an idea for how you'd like to use machine learning in your own life, you could pick something like making a Street View house numbers classifier where all the data sets are set up to make it very straightforward for you. And that way you get to exercise all of the basic skills while you read the book or while you watch Coursera videos that explain the concepts to you.
So over the last couple of years, I've also seen you do more and more work on adversarial examples. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I think adversarial examples are the beginning of a new field that I call machine learning security. In the past, we've seen computer security issues where attackers could fool a computer into running the wrong code. That's called application level security. And there's been attacks where people can fool a computer into believing that messages on a network come from somebody that is not actually who they say they are. And that's called network level security. Now we're starting to see that you can also fool machine learning algorithms into doing things they shouldn't. Even if the program running the machine learning algorithm is running the correct code, even if the program running the machine learning algorithm knows who all the messages on the network really came from. And I think it's important to build security into any new technology near the start of its development. We found that it's very hard to build a working system first and then add security later. So I am really excited about the idea that if we dive in and start anticipating security problems with machine learning now, we can make sure that these algorithms are secure from the start instead of trying to patch it in retroactively years later.
Thank you. That was great. There was a lot about your story that I thought was fascinating and that despite having known you for years, I didn't actually know. So thank you for sharing all that.
Oh, very welcome. Thank you for inviting me. It was a great chat.
Okay, thanks you.
Very welcome.